Hi, I'm Chad, and in this video I'm going to cover manufacturing properties and why they're such an important component of the overall industrial real estate market. Before we get in depth, I think it'll help if we first break manufacturing down to a very basic level. Things get delivered to the property, those things are manufactured, produced, or assembled, then those things get shipped out. I covered the importance of ensuring a property can adequately handle things coming in and going out in the first video, so this video will focus on the processes involved within the building itself. So let's jump into it. When you think of a manufacturing property, an image of a heavy industrial property might come to mind, but there are also many companies specializing in basic assembly or light manufacturing. These companies, while still manufacturers in the broader sense of the term, require a different type of industrial property altogether. Let's consider two companies. One is a metal fabricator which welds, cuts, burns, and machines different types of raw materials. The other company assembles computer parts and electronics. The fabrication space would undoubtedly be heavy industrial, whereas the computer company's space could almost resemble an office space. And if we put these two companies at either end of the spectrum, you can imagine all the different types of companies that would fall in between. This helps explain why industrial real estate is such a broad category. It also highlights why it's not always easy assigning a label to every property. It's led to a relatively new category called flex properties, which is a catch-all term intended to describe properties which cater to a number of different uses. I'm focusing on warehouse and manufacturing properties in this series of videos, but don't ignore all these flex properties, which could also be suitable options for various companies. The various building types also underscores why zoning is such an integral part of differentiating between industrial and commercial properties. It will vary from market to market, but most municipalities will have a zoning regulation which specifically identifies which properties are industrial, and by extension, what uses will be permitted under those regulations. It's also common to see the zoning broken out into subcategories of light, medium, or heavy industrial. There might even be a business or general industrial zoning, which goes to show how some modern industrial properties blur the line between retail and office properties. Since there's such a wide spectrum of different types of manufacturing properties, there isn't a single property that will work for every company. I'll cover the major aspects next, but just be aware that every company will be unique and prioritize different components. Let's start with clear ceiling heights, which is the height from the floor to the underside of the roof truss. Most modern buildings are being built with a minimum of 24-foot clear ceiling heights, but some older properties may be less than 20 feet. I sold a property a few years ago that only had 14-foot clear ceiling heights, and it was an insurmountable problem for many of the companies that looked at it. It ultimately sold to a roofing company that did not need high ceilings, but I believe it sold for less than it would have if it had higher ceilings. Like many of the other components I'm going to address, I'd suggest you don't necessarily need to be the best on the block. You just want to make sure you have a building that is competitive with similar types of buildings. This can also be illustrated with the electrical power to the building. Having a lot of power to a building will be critical for some manufacturers, but less so for others. The amount of power should scale with the building, meaning larger properties should have more power than a smaller building, but some tenants will have a certain requirement for power irrespective of the building size. It's helpful to confirm the amps and volts to the property, but it will also be advisable to have any prospective tenant confirm themselves. After all, a company would be prudent to have an electrician or an electrical engineer audit their equipment to project how much power will be required, so part of the process is making sure the building is compatible. I'd stress that you don't want to underestimate the importance of having adequate power to the building, or at least have a comfort level on what it would cost to upgrade if necessary. Moving on, let's talk cranes. It's common for manufacturing tenants to have a crane requirement, so if there isn't already a crane, it would be helpful if the building was at least designed to accommodate it in the future. Almost any building can theoretically handle a crane, but if the building was not designed for it at the beginning, the cost to retrofit it can be prohibitively expensive. Again, not every tenant requires it, but it can be a deal breaker for certain tenants. Let's go over the common types of cranes and some of the terminology you'll encounter. Bridge crane. I've also heard these called overhead cranes or craneways, so keep in mind the terms might vary across different markets, but the intent with a bridge crane is that it travels along a fixed rail system. Depending on what the building and the crane itself is engineered to handle, these systems can typically handle 1 to 20 tons of capacity, and in some cases even more. Another type of crane that's common is called a jib crane. A jib crane is typically fixed to either the floor, wall, or column, and is designed to do repetitive tasks. The jib might swivel or it just might move up and down. It's possible to have a portable jib crane, just as it's possible to have a portable overhead crane on wheels, which is actually called a gantry crane. Pay close attention to whether the crane is fixed or portable, as it could determine who actually owns it. Since a bridge or jib crane is attached directly to the property, it is often considered a chattel and accordingly would form part of the property. You'll want to check if there are any pre-existing agreements in place though, as it's not always black and white. A couple more important notes on cranes. Cranes require regular inspections and certifications. There are all sorts of various components and designs within each of these categories, so don't hesitate to reach out to a crane specialist if you have questions about a specific crane. Another key number that some manufacturers want to know is the underhook height of the crane. As the name suggests, this is the height of the floor to the height under the hook at its highest point. In addition to paying attention to the size of the building itself, I would also recommend analyzing the breakdown of office to warehouse space and ensuring it's consistent with the market. If the majority of the market has buildings with a certain ratio, let's use a hypothetical 25% office, 75% warehouse, you should be cautious if your building deviates too much outside the typical configuration. If you have a building with only 5% office, it might mean you could be faced with a sizable cost to build out more office. If you have a building with 50% office, you might have to demolish some of it to make the building more functional. That's not an ironclad rule, of course, as having a unique configuration might cater well to a tenant that has a unique requirement. All these points are just intended to provide some high-level information, but recognize every single scenario will be different. Along the lines of looking at the breakdown of office to warehouse, I would also look at the ratio of the building to the site size, which is often called the site coverage ratio. Again, this will be tenant specific, but the amount of yard space can dramatically impact the rentability of the property. It's typically more important for manufacturing companies, which need yard space for materials or equipment, but even some distributors have a requirement to park vehicles or trailers. It's also important to see if the yard area has been graveled and how well it's been done. A poorly graveled yard will create soft spots and potentially drainage issues as well. Some companies will also have a requirement for exterior lighting and fencing in the yard. The last points I want to cover are sprinklers and makeup air units. I spoke on both of these topics in more detail in the last video, so I'll just touch on them here. There are various types, but a sprinkler system is designed to suppress fires and mitigate damage. The cost of installing one can be significant, so be aware that it might be a requirement of the tenant, the insurance company, or the municipality. Moving on to makeup air units, a makeup air unit is designed to turn over 100% of the indoor air with outdoor air and can have a dramatic impact on the health of the workers and the building itself. Similar to a sprinkler system, it's not necessarily mandatory, but many tenants might require it. Congratulations if you've made it this far. I know it's a lot of information to take in. But to round out this video, I want to add a few additional comments and things to warn you about as you embark on your investing journey. First, I have to stress that I'm just scratching the surface on these areas. Whether you're looking into cranes, makeup air, sprinkler systems, or any of the other specific components, note that there are professionals dedicated entirely to these fields. So knowing about the importance of these components is a critical first step, but don't be afraid to learn even more and be ready to hire consultants as required. Also, there are a number of smaller factors that will also come up, such as the type of warehouse lighting, quality of office build-out, or the HVAC systems, to name a few. I don't want to diminish the importance of those factors, but generally speaking, the costs involved in upgrading any of those areas will be much less than, say, having to raise a roof. And in addition to these areas, there are virtually endless amount of specialized requirements that an industrial tenant may have. No building can accommodate every single tenant, but as a general rule of thumb, you want to ensure your building has the best chance of staying occupied at the best price you can get. So keep on top of what is in demand and find a property that checks as many of the boxes as possible. Quick highlight of the next couple of videos as well. I'm really excited to do an interview with Mark Duclos, current president of SIOR and co-founder and president of Centric Commercial. I'm going to talk to Mark about what he saw for industrial real estate in different markets last year and trends he's following this year. Mark is an amazing guy. I'm sure you'll love hearing from him. Following the interview with Mark, I'm going to get into some advanced investment analysis for commercial real estate. We'll go beyond cap rates and look into discounted cash flow analysis. We'll cover terms such as internal rates of return and net present value, but I'll make it as simple and straightforward as I can. So if you're interested in learning more, subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss either of those videos. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. which could also be suitable options for various companies.